Hundreds and hundreds of processes can be used as age dating methods.
And the vast majority of these point to a recently created universe.
We'll discuss a few of these this week on Creation Magazine Live.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name is Calvin Smith.
And I'm Richard Fangrad.
And this week we're going to talk about scientific evidence for recent creation. Now, we've done an episode on this already.
We have.
On the same topic, and we're just going to continue basically from where we left off, because there's tons of evidence, tons of stuff to talk about.
Yep.
So, but to watch the original episode, you can just go to creation.com/CML2-05, Creation Magazine Live, episode 5. And you can see a whole bunch of other stuff.
That's right. Now, we can start off with an update on the fresh dinosaur bones and update that a little bit. And
right.
Note, we're talking here about dinosaur bones, not dinosaur fossils.
Right.
Unfossilized dinosaur bone. And we did a whole program on that just a few weeks ago. You can see that on if you missed it. Look at creation.com/CML3-02.
Yeah. Now, there have been discoveries of blood cells in dinosaur bones going way back to the early 90s.
Right.
And then in 2005, evolutionists found soft and stretchy material inside of a T-Rex leg bone, along with blood vessels and blood cells. And there have been other discoveries since that time, right? Mary Schweitzer, the original founder of this, she's found more now in hadrosaurs and et cetera. And we've summarized that on a previous episode, and you can view that at creation.com/CML1-11. And some great things there.
Now, here's the update on fresh dinosaur bones. Dinosaur DNA.
Right.
That's the latest and greatest. Believe it or not, scientists have discovered dinosaur DNA in unfossilized dinosaur bones. Now, like other biological structures that have already been found in dinosaur bones, obviously DNA cannot last for millions of years.
Right.
In fact, researchers have suggested that if it was frozen, given the best possible preservation scenario, it could only last about 10% back to the time of dinosaurs.
Right.
But 6.8 million years, not 68 million years.
So, yeah. Dinosaurs fit with biblical history, right?
They do.
Not evolution. And we've got a place you can find that article, by the way, creation.com/dino-DNA. Well, we've got another observation that fits with the Bible's history, and that's the world's oldest living organisms,
okay.
Right? Which date back to the time of the flood, again, supporting biblical history. And they're trees, right? Trees are the world's oldest living things that we know of. And the bristlecone pines, for example, from the White Mountains in California, they're the world's oldest living organisms. The oldest of these date to right around the time of the flood, and the ages are estimated by counting the number of tree rings, of course, right?
Right.
And cross-referencing those tree rings with other trees, both living and dead. Since it's not possible that the exact age of trees, because trees can have multiple rings per year and things like that, but we can get a good date range for them.
Yeah.
And they date right back to the time of the flood, which is exactly what you expect, that after the flood, when the world started to replenish, that's when we find those things. So you can check that out at creation.com/tall-trees.
Another thing we could think about is trees are also among the largest living things today. For example, a sequoia tree in California, nicknamed General Sherman, is the world's largest living organism. Its bulk is more than 10 times that of a blue whale.
That's crazy.
It's just huge. It's the largest living thing. It's only about 2,400 years old. So it's interesting that scientists who study these sequoias realize that they're middle-aged trees. They're middle-aged.
2,400 years and they're middle-aged.
They're middle-aged,
wow.
But they're growing like teenagers. It's like they're in a growth spurt. These trees pack on the equivalent of about a 1-foot diameter tree, 100 feet tall every year. That's how much wood they pack on. So they're vigorous trees. And plant biologists agree and even expect that these vigorously growing, magnificent ancient trees could continue to grow for many thousands of years from here on. So the question is, why don't we find some of these trees today that are 7, 8, 9,000 years old? We
right.
don't. We don't.
So they have the potential
They have
to
the
last
potential.
thousands of years, but we've never
So why don't we see any that are that old?
Right.
That's the question. Again, it goes right back to the time of the flood. The biblical history fits these observations very, very well. Right.
Many people are under the mistaken impression that people from different racial backgrounds have big differences in their DNA instructions. But this is not the case. The entire human race has a remarkably low level of genetic variety. Some biologists have remarked that if you sequence the DNA of two humans on opposite sides of the globe, their DNA would show less variation than that of two chimpanzees on the same mountain in Africa. These discoveries have profound implications. Since the human race has low genetic variety, this means it must have originated fairly recently. Racial groups have not, therefore, evolved independently over long periods of time. These discoveries are consistent with the Bible's version of history, whereby the human population originated from two parents only thousands of years ago, and that the people groups have originated since then.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
If you just tuned in, we're talking about evidence for a recent creation.
We are.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Yellowstone Park with the
Okay.
petrified forests. Now, the Yellowstone petrified forests are considered to be evidence for a timescale that doesn't fit with the Bible. So let's see. In some places in Yellowstone Park, erosion of a hillside reveals layers of upright petrified trees. We've got to first describe what we're seeing there and then how this supposedly goes against what the Bible says.
Right.
At Specimen Ridge, there are said to be 27 layers, while Specimen Creek contains about 50. This means that the Specimen Creek Formation is especially huge. Its total vertical height is about 1,000 meters. Now, evolutionists and long-agers usually teach the following scenario. 1. Each layer is the remains of a forest, a separate forest. Each forest was buried where it grew by volcanic ash and other debris. 3. Dissolved minerals were soaked up by the trees, petrifying them. After about 200 years, the ash weathered into clay, then into soil. Point number 5, a new forest grew on top of where the previous one had stood. From the well-preserved tree rings, the oldest trees in each layer was about 500 years old on average. 6, the new forest was buried by volcanic ash and the process repeated. And finally, the entire stack of layers was eroded such that their edges are now exposed in a cliff. But of course, if this scenario were true, that would have taken about 40,000 years, they estimate, to form the entire series. And of course, that doesn't fit the biblical timeline, right?
Right, yeah. Now there are some problems with this interpretation. We can look at some of the problems here. For example, there's only root balls. The Yellowstone petrified trees have their large roots broken off, leaving root balls. This happens when trees are forcefully pushed out of the ground, like by wind or water or bulldozer or something like that. Another point, there's no petrified branches or petrified bark. Something has stripped most of the bark and broken the limbs off, leaving only the knots in the trunks. There's another strange issue there. Here's another one. Some of the trees extend into the forest layer above, but if the next layer had to wait for hundreds of years, like the interpretation that we just heard,
right,
for the ash to weather into soil so that the next forest could grow, then the exposed tree top would have completely decayed.
Right, but they're there.
But they're there anyway.
Right.
They extend into the next layer. Another problem, when trees fall in forest, especially with a flat floor, they have an equal chance of lying in any direction. But here, they tend to align in the same direction. This is consistent with a common force, like moving water or mud or wind, something like that, again, pushing the trees down.
Right.
So that doesn't fit with the long age explanation either.
Right.
Here's another one. If the layers had been buried by volcanic eruptions thousands of years apart, the mineral content of each layer would probably have been quite different. But the mineral content remains the same throughout over a kilometer of vertical height. This suggests one or a few volcanic episodes, perhaps with many pulses within each episode, all within a fairly short time frame. And here's another one. Growing forests have definite soil layers with lots of rootlets. However, the petrified forests, so-called forests, lack any of these. And in real forests, plant debris forms an organic layer on the forest floor. And the deeper the material, the older it is, so the more time it has to decay. But the petrified forests, again, lack any pattern of greater decay with depth, so they're And also, there are also finely preserved leaves. Since leaves decay quickly and lose their shape shortly after they fall off the tree, these leaves probably were buried very quickly.
Right.
And a couple more. Volcanic materials, such as feldspars, quickly weather into clay when exposed to water and air. But the petrified forest lacks clay. You don't see clay there. This suggests that none of the layers were exposed for very long. And finally, tree rings from trees buried at different levels show matching patterns. So all the trees appear to have been living at the same time.
So really what we're saying here is that the evolutionary explanation has some real serious problems, huge problems, right? But a far better explanation would be what creationists teach. The flood.
Yeah, global flood.
Right? A global flood could explain these things. Flood waters would be uprooted, would have uprooted the trees, ripping off the root branches as the trees were floating. Of course, the bark's rubbed off, and we see real examples of this today. For example, in Spirit Lake near Mount St. Helens, where the floating log mats knock off all the bark. The root ends, of course, would soak up water and eventually become waterlogged, right? And so they'd tip up and they'd stand upright. And then the whole tree becomes waterlogged. Of course, it drops to the bottom. And then other trees drop at different levels and are all buried. So you can picture this happening, them bumping together. They lean up, they come down. More sediments come in, they bury them. And then other trees at different rates stand up. And then you'd have basically what we see at Specimen Ridge.
Yeah, and that's a good example. That's a good explanation for the data that we see there in Yellowstone Park.
And good evidence of a young Earth. We'll be back.
Creation Ministries International focuses on the Bible's first book, Genesis, and the creation-evolution issue. Many of our speakers are scientists with PhDs who, before joining CMI, were employed in various scientific fields. Creation Ministries speakers go to churches, equipping and encouraging people with the message of the truth and authority of the Bible and its relevance to the real world. To locate upcoming CMI events or inquire about booking a speaker into your church, visit creation.com.
Welcome back. This week we're talking about observations that are typically interpreted to take millions of years, but we're finding that these fit more neatly into a biblical time frame.
Right.
We can talk about additional things. Let's move on with another dating method, the erosion of continents. The continents are constantly eroding. Sedimentologists have researched many of the world's rivers, and you can see some of the data here, and calculated how fast the land is disappearing. Now, the average height reduction, if we average all of this out, the average height reduction for all the continents in the world is 60 millimeters per 1,000 years, about 2.4 inches per 1,000 years. That equates to some 24 billion tons of sediment a year. That's quite a bit. If the continents had an elevation, get this, of 150 kilometers, they would above sea level, they would have been completely eroded in 2.5 million years. 2.5 billion years, billion years. That's the supposed age for the continents. In 2.5 billion years, you can erode 150 kilometers of continent. If the erosion had been going on for billions of years, no continents should remain. We shouldn't see any.
So the fact is the continents themselves are evidence of a young Earth.
Yes.
Now this problem has been highlighted by a number of geologists who calculated that North America should have been leveled in only about 10 million years if erosion has continued at the average rate that we see it today.
10 million, not billion.
10 million, yeah. And this is, of course, a ridiculously short time when you compare it to the supposed 2.5 billion year age for the continents.
Right, yeah. And some mountaintops, the evolutionists say that mountains are being uplifted. And in mountainous areas, well, those areas where the uplift is happening should have been replaced many times if the continents are really that old.
This is their common objection, right? Wait a sec. The things are uplifting all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
it doesn't work. If you do the math, it doesn't work. Those uplifted areas should have been, again, replaced many times over, if the millions of years time scale is correct. And the rocks that they're made of should not be old rocks. Or should not be young rocks. All the old rocks should have been eroded a long time ago. But we find both young rocks and old rocks, all the ages of the rocks, according to their dating method, on these mountains. Like Dinosaur age rock, for example, 65 million year old rock. Well, we shouldn't find that old rock
because there shouldn't be any 60 million year old rock on
should have been
rocks that
eroded
would have been eroded
long time
millions
ago.
of years before.
Yes,
right.
yeah. And for details on that, you can go to creation.com/erosion for some more fascinating details on that particular dating method.
Right. Now we can swing way away and look at a different evidence, the origin of agriculture. Something a little bit different, but secular dating puts it at about 10,000 years ago, the origin of agriculture.
Right.
And yet the same chronology says that modern man has supposedly been around for at least 200,000 years. You kind of think that 200,000 years, somebody would have kind of figured out, yeah, if I take this seed and I drop it in the ground, I might get some stuff, and then we wouldn't have had to been hunter-gatherers and all that kind of stuff. But see, 10,000 years, that fits with the biblical time scale, right?
Yeah, you can work it in there.
Way more than the evolutionary one, anyway.
We can think about coral reefs. Here's another thing that evolutionists say takes millions of years. Well, evolutionists from Darwin to the present believe that, coral reefs took longer than the biblical timescale to form.
Right.
However, even significant modern reefs like the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, they're recent for an evolutionist. Evolutionists believe that they're recent because evolutionists believe at the last ice age, which they claim was about 11,000 years ago. Of course, an ice age takes huge amounts of water out of the oceans and builds up these glaciers, these ice sheets,
on the
which
Earth,
would lower the ocean levels. So the Great Barrier Reef, 11,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, was dry land where the reef is today. So it grew in the last 10,000 years.
Right,
so even evolutionists believe it was
there
young.
couldn't have been a reef there if there was no water there, right? And also, no live coral takes place below about 50 meters under the ocean, under the surface, because lack of light is going to kill the reef. Yeah. So both warmer oceans and rising ocean levels toward the end of the ice age, which followed the flood, that's what we would believe, right? That there was an ice age. That had greatly increased coral reef growth rates, enabling some to grow to great height. And some coral reefs are more than 1 kilometer tall.
Yeah, they're huge.
Amazing.
If we think of the ice age, we certainly believe there was an ice age. It happened after the flood. It was triggered by the flood.
Right.
It would have lowered ocean levels, of course, by hundreds of feet.
Right.
And then as the glaciers are melting toward the end of the ice age, the ocean levels go up. The sunlight works on the reef and builds these. And some reefs, as you just said, are over 1 kilometer tall.
If you want a great interview from a coral expert, go to creation.com/Carter interview and see what Dr. Rob Carter has to say about this. And we'll be back.
Many biologists have long touted that much of our DNA is useless junk. Richard Dawkins put it this way: can we measure the information capacity of that portion of the genome which is actually used? We can at least estimate it. In the case of the human genome, it is about 2%. Thus, to Dawkins, the other 98% of the genome was useless junk. But these statements are based on ignorance. Just because we aren't aware of a function of much of our DNA doesn't mean that it has no function. A recent paper in the prestigious journal Nature has now shown that about 93% of the human genome is used, not 2 or 3%. And further studies may raise this to 100%. So the whole genome is probably used, and there is no such thing as junk DNA. It's an idea that belongs in the trash can, as Bible-believing scientists said when the idea was proposed.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, today we're talking about evidence for a recent creation. Here's another thing that we can look at. The moon's magnetic field. This is not something that's talked about very often, but from rocks that were sampled from the moon, they have a residual magnetism that indicates that the moon once had a magnetic field that was stronger than the Earth. Now, there is no the evolutionist dynamo mechanism for producing magnetic field just doesn't work on the moon. It wouldn't even account for a weak magnetic field on the moon, let alone a strong one, stronger than the Earth's magnetic field today. So again, that doesn't fit the billions of years time frame. It makes more sense that the moon was created recently. The evidence is consistent with that. A recent creation of the moon and its magnetic field and free decay since that time, like the free decay that the Earth is experiencing as well. There's a great article by a physicist, Dr. Russell Humphreys, on this topic exactly. If you want to look at some of the details, there's a serious problem for evolutionists. The moon is not 4.6 billion years old based on this particular dating method, the moon's magnetism, the high magnetism of the moon.
Right.
You can go to creation.com/moonsmag.
Now, we've talked about human population growth in Season 2, Episode 5, talking about the current population of the world, which it fits with biblical history, not the millions of years scenario.
Yes.
And if you want to just catch up on that, it's creation.com/CML2-05, so season 2, episode 5. But here's another indication that the evolutionary story for humans just doesn't work. The Stone Age, it was supposed to last about 100,000 years. Between 1 million and 10 million people were supposed to be living on the earth at that time, right?
According to the evolutionary
According
scenario.
to the evolutionary scenario.
Yes.
Again, this is their data. But fossil evidence shows that people buried their dead. Often
in the Stone Age,
with a lot of artifacts in burial. Now, if there were just 1 million people alive during that time, with an average generation time of 25 years, there should have been maybe 4 billion bodies buried, along with many artifacts during that time period. If there were 10 million people, it would have been about 40 billion bodies buried. Well, this doesn't really work here, does it, from what we find?
Where are all the bodies?
Exactly.
And if the evolutionary time scale is correct, then we would expect to find the skeletons of these buried bodies because we've supposedly found bones much older than that. Now, we question the dating methods, whether the bones are actually that old. But in the evolutionary
we're talking about their scenario. Yeah.
They're saying, bones do last that long. But even if they wouldn't, as you just said, they're still burying people during the Stone Age, apparently, with artifacts. Well, certainly the artifacts would have survived.
Right, even if you can explain away the bodies, you should still find the artifacts.
Yes. Well, where are they?
Yeah. There's some details you can check out at creation.com/people. Great article that gives you more information there. Now, we've also got the faint young sun paradox. Here's a different evidence again.
Yes.
According to stellar evolution theory, as the sun's core transforms from hydrogen to helium by means of nuclear fission, the mean molecular weight increases.
Yeah, it's fusion.
Yes. And which would compress the sun's core by increasing the fusion rate, right? So the sun ought to have brightened about 25% since the appearance of life on Earth. It should have been getting brighter.
Yep.
Right?
According to some of these, with these evolutionary assumptions built in, this is what they're saying.
Yeah. So this translates into 16 to 18 degree temperature increase on the Earth. Now, the current average temperature on the Earth is about 15 degrees. So 3.8 billion years ago, if you do the math, that means when life was supposed to have evolved, it would have been about -2.
Wow.
That doesn't really work at all.
It doesn't work. Given their data,
and you just work out their own,
and so on, given all their dates and so on, you get, here's a paradox. Oops, it would have been really cold on Earth when life was supposedly evolved. Evolutionists say it's supposed to be warmer.
That's right. It was supposed to be warmer in the past, and of course, you can check out this at creation.com/faintsun to see and work out the math for yourself.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that we've explored here on this week's program a wide variety of dating methods. Not only looking at geology or biology, but population growth and all kinds of different things, astronomy, the moon, different types of things. And many of these different dating methods fit beautifully with what the Bible tells us about the Earth's past.
Right, and evolutionists, in a sense, don't talk about this a lot. They want to talk about the ones that supposedly support the evolutionary timeline, radioisotope dating and things like that. So, yeah. Anyway, hopefully that'll give you more information to bolster your faith.
Richard Van Grad and Calvin Smith also host a fast-paced and informal internet-based video program called Genesis Unleashed. These faith-building teaching videos feature responses to news articles, summaries of articles on creation.com, interviews, and answers to some of the most asked questions about the creation-evolution issue and the most attacked book of the Bible, Genesis. Visit creation.com's Media Center to view or subscribe to the latest video content.
Okay, now we're going to talk about feedback, some feedback that we get usually via email to our website and things like that. This week's feedback comes from Ryan. Ryan is a Christian who's struggling with his faith.
Right.
Popular story nowadays, but he's struggling with his faith. Perhaps many of you are struggling with your faith. That's why you're watching this program. Well done. That's great. Go to creation.com, get more information. But we just thought that this particular feedback was very appropriate given the subject that the kinds of things we're talking about here. Building the faith in areas where atheists and skeptics have tried to attack the Bible.
Right.
And we're responding
Sometimes
to those.
people think there's just this mountain of evidence for evolution and maybe our faith's silly, etc. Right?
Yes.
Yep. So he said he was born and raised in a Christian home. He grew up hearing Bible stories and always desired to live a godly life. And then he said, however, in the past 2 years, it seems I've been slipping into an increasingly terrifying spiral of doubt and unbelief. It started with the idea that I was going to go on the internet, YouTube specifically, and share the gospel with an unsaved world. He said, I love your information, but when I try to commit my heart to trust the Lord more and repent of doubt, I have all those old ideas pulling me away. I believe Jesus died and rose again, but I feel like I'm not convinced enough. How can I render my heart back in full conviction to the Lord?
Yeah, and you can read more of this. Just look up Dealing with Doubt on creation.com. We've kind of highlighted the main points here.
Right.
And who responded to this here? Lita Kostner, one of our information officers, New Testament scholar at our U.S. office. She says this: the first thing we have to establish is that salvation is the work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. It doesn't depend on us, thank God. If it depended on us, it would never work. Our inability to save ourselves is the entire reason Jesus had to come to save us. You say that you had a moment of true conversion. If that's the case, then that had nothing to do with how good you were at believing the right stuff.
Right.
Right? I like that point. It's good to think of.
It's not on his shoulders.
It's completely a work of the Holy Spirit that brings us to Christ. I think that should give you tremendous comfort, and hopefully it gives you tremendous comfort as well.
Right. She had some suggestions, of course, and some questions for him. One of the questions was, are you in a Bible-believing church? If so, you need to talk to your pastors about these doubts. That's number one, some Christians are saying, well, I'm a Christian, but I don't really have a home church. And so the Bible talks about fellowship with fellow believers and being under the authority of a good Bible teaching and believing pastor that can help you with some of these things. You need to fellowship and voice those doubts and get answers.
Absolutely.
Great that he found creation.com to get answers.
I mean, continuing to learn about the Bible and fellowship with other believers is critical to spiritual growth.
Exactly.
You can bounce ideas that you might have or struggles in your faith off of fellow believers, strong Christians, and that fellowship is important. You got to go to church.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Completely stop your interactions with YouTube sites that are causing you to doubt. You don't go into the battle half-dressed, right?
Yeah.
It might be hard news to swallow, but you need to get some more information first. Take a step back, maybe temporarily, get some more information, and then you can go out and it's great what you're doing, what Ryan is doing there, going on and telling people the good news about Jesus. That's good stuff.
The thing is, though, you can get tired out just like in everything. So if you just constantly sit there and get beat all the time, maybe it's time to step back. Instead, spend more time in Scripture and reading sound apologetic material that can help you answer the questions that you have. That seems pretty common sense, but doesn't that make more sense? There's only so much poison you can take, right, at one time.
Right.
So stop that, get some good stuff in there, dilute it a bit, and you'll do better. Well, join us next time on Creation Magazine Live, where you can learn more things that will embolden your faith.